Hi, I'm Gail Bannock.
And I'm Alana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the She Means Business podcast. Today, we are thrilled to have Glain Roberts-McCabe to the show. Glain is the founder and president of the Roundtable, specializing in helping high-potential leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth. With over 30 years of leadership and coaching experience, she works with teams to make a bigger collective impact. Glain has advised senior executives globally, brands like PepsiCo and Royal Bank, and the Roundtable has received multiple awards, including 2 ICF Prism Awards. She has authored 2 best-selling books and has holds several coaching certifications. Glain lives with her family in Toronto. I first met Glain when we did a Roundtable program several years ago, and this really impacted the way I lead and show up as a leader. And I've since worked with her on a number of occasions in different capacities. I'm so excited to have her here and to share her thoughts and wisdom on career and life in general. So welcome to the show, Glain. We're so happy to have you.
I am excited to be here. And then it's great to work with you in another capacity.
I know, it's so exciting to be back together. We'd love to start off with just having you tell us a little bit about your background, because it is a little bit of a different background than we're used to, and just share how kind of your professional journey and how the Roundtable came to be.
Yeah. So, I'll give you the quick career trajectory. I think I'm a quintessential Gen X career person because I started my career, I was going to be in advertising, and then I switched over to not-for-profit. I did fundraising for a while, and then I switched over to more not-for-profit, and then I stumbled into corporate training and ended up in my late 20s at a consultancy here in Toronto. And I'd been leading at that point for quite a few years, but that was such a great learning ground for me because I was suddenly in a place where not only was I leading, but I was also learning a lot about my leadership. And it was really in the time that I spent with that firm that I started to think a lot about high potential leaders, a lot about coaching, a lot about how we do leadership development. I started to get quite obsessed with the concept of leaders teaching leaders. You learn leadership by doing it. I'm a really big believer in that. You can read a ton of books on leadership. You can, know all the sort of mechanics of what you need to do when you need to fire somebody or hire somebody. But until you go and do that, until you face the emotions of that, until you face yourself in stressful situations, you really don't know, right? You don't know how you're going to be showing up, performing, impacting other people. So I love the idea of finding a place where leaders could share wisdom with each other. And that was really the seeds of what is now the company I own, the Roundtable, really came from, at the time, looking at all these CEO groups. Back in the early 2000s, there was lots of groups for CEOs. And I remember my boss was in one. And I remember saying to him, hey, where's the group for me? Like, I'm this fast tracking leader. Where's my group? Where's my peer group? And he's like, well, no, you have to be the owner of the company or the president to be a part of these groups. And I thought, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, what about leaders in the middle on the way to the top? Leadership is stressful at any stage. We have that expression, it's lonely at the top. And I always used to say, well, it's lonely in the middle on the way to the top too. And how do we create networks of support, but also networks of expertise and learn together and grow together? So that was really how I started to think about a new offering in the leadership space that was really more driven around this concept of experienced leaders and high potential leaders specifically helping each other, and then therefore kind of raising the watermark in their organizations as a result.
You have a series of assessments that you do for people who participate in your program,
yes,
which I think form the basis of kind of how you enter. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the power of that in the program that you do, and more generally just on how it kind of gives insight to individuals, whether they're in a program or not, in terms of what to work on?
Yeah. So I think at the core, when we're leaders and as we and especially again, because our focus is on high potential leaders, if you're a high potential, high performing leader, you've probably been promoted pretty quickly. You've moved up pretty quickly. The things that have made you successful, there's Marshall Goldsmith's great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. That starts to become very true. And the thing about work is table stakes are what you do, the results you deliver. That's the table stakes, right? You should be doing that. If you're not doing that, then you're probably not going to be lasting at your job too long. What starts to trip people up over time is how they do what they do, right? How are you showing up? How's your behavior impacting other people? So one of the very grounding things in our core leadership program, which is a program called the Roundtable for Leaders, is that we have our participants go through a 360 assessment, but it's behavioral. And what that does is it gives the leader a really great snapshot of how are other people experiencing me. I think the way I operate is the way everybody operates, because don't you just do things that way, Right. And so what we do is we get people to do this 360, which gives them a really robust view of how does my boss see me? How do my peers see me? How do my direct reports see me? And what's the impact of that behavior? And is that how I want to be impacted? And I've seen leaders who've been in the same company for 25 years and who've had their performance reviews for years, and then they'll always get the same piece of feedback. You're not strategic enough, you're not strategic enough, you're not strategic. And so after a while, that just falls on deaf ears, right? And what I found when you have a really strong assessment tool that can get under the covers of that for people, and you start looking into, okay, you're perceived as not strategic enough, but is that because you've got other behaviors that really are overshadowing your thinking? Are you just not engaging in behaviors with your boss that would allow them to see how strategic you actually are? And so one of the big things in our process is we say behavior change is hard. It's really difficult. And the really tricky thing for senior people is that your biggest behavioral opportunity is probably tapped into your strength, right? And your Achilles heel is completely connected to that strength. So what we'll do is we'll help the leader find what we call the big bang for the buck behavior. What is one behavior that if you started to finesse it a little bit, it's not a personality shift, we're just talking dialing the needle a little bit more to the right on that behavior, it would have massive impact in your career, right?
On the other side, we talked a little bit about being managers. And so what advice would you have to people from a coaching perspective of their teams, their direct teams or people around the organization in terms of how to build that skill set?
One of the things you can do if you're really interested in improving your coaching is, sign up for a coaching program just to get clear on it. But at the end of the day, the two main skills for coaching are asking powerful questions and listening, and actively listening. I think what we're good at in organizations, and certainly it's still a battle I have with my own team, like if they were here, they'd tell you, is that when we're leaders and when you're a young manager, you've probably been promoted because you're really good at solving problems and you're really good at, that sort of quick making decisions, solving the problem. And so often we confuse that with coaching, right? We think that because we've helped and we've solved the problem, we've been a good coach. When in fact, we are not really empowering people to solve the problem on their own. And that's really and I think actually a great tool for if you're a young leader, one of my favorite tools is Situational Leadership by Ken Blanchard and his partner, Paul Hersey. And it really talks about the two levers we need to pull as leaders, being directive or being supportive, and how to do that. So I'd really encourage young leaders to take a look at that, because you're not always going to be a coach. Sometimes you have to be directive. Sometimes you do have to tell people what to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's knowing when to toggle between directive and supportive behavior, which is what coaching is.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that's really interesting. This idea of you want to be a good leader. I remember I always wanted to be a good leader, and I didn't know that was coaching. I wanted my team to do well, and I wanted to proceed in my career. tell us a little bit more about how do you know when to do what as a leader?
Yeah, so I think it's always about like the readiness of your direct report, right? So if we use the situational leadership model as a little bit of a frame, and I was just actually having this conversation with one of my groups this week. So the scenario was one of the leaders was sharing a scenario where they have a new direct report, they gave them some work to do, and the person didn't complete it in time, right? They were given 3 things. They barely started one thing when the manager did the check-in. And the thing about that is the manager had a set of expectations on speed because of the pace of that organization. But when you dig in, you find out, well, they weren't given, though, the direction that I expect you to have all 3 things done by the end of the day. So I think one of the things we need to be really clear on within ourselves as leaders is what's the bias you tend to have? Do you tend to be kind of people biased where you're really big about the relationship? You think, you like to support people, or do you lean more on the results side? That's one thing to look at within yourself. Like, what's your bias? Because most of us don't balance those 2 things particularly well. We lean one way or the other. Then we need to look at, if I've got a brand new direct report, well, they don't know where the photocopier is. Of course, you have to be directive. It is not, I think people struggle with the difference between being nice and being kind. It is not nice to not set out clear expectations for people. You are not being kind doing that to people. It is clear as kind. So if you know your culture is really fast paced, you expect a certain level of output, tell people that. Right? It's okay to be directive on what the boundaries are for people. And then as the person progresses, that's when you can start to see, okay, they're getting it. They know the boundaries, they're hitting the right level of good. Now I can see they're being tentative. Now I want to be more of a coach. Why are you nervous about going in and doing that presentation? You've got this. What's going on? Right? That's when you want to move into coach mode and be able to kind of let them go.
So Glain, as we wrap up, I know the whole episode has been around advice, but what advice would you give your younger self as you're knowing what you know now about how to manage your career?
I think, and this might be because I'm very type A, what I wish I had done differently in the early stages of my career would be to make my work less life or death. Like, I think I felt so much pressure to perform. I think I got promoted very quickly in a lot of places because I was burning myself out. I mean, I was over delivering on everything. I was working really hard. Through my 20s, I didn't really have much of a social life. And I think what I've learned, I think becoming a parent shifts that for you, but as I see, a lot of the younger leaders that we work with in that pressure cooker, I think what you get as you get older, maybe it's the age comes the wisdom, is you just start to see how much of that pressure is internal. And I think we give away a lot of our power to our organizations. I can't ask for this. I can't say that. I can't do this. I can't tell them what I want to do with my career because that might limit me from other opportunities. We create a lot of self-talk in ourselves. And I think if I could go back, I have no regrets about my career. I've enjoyed everything I've done, but I think I would have said to myself, hey, take a breath. It's going to be okay. You don't need to take a 3-month mat leave. You can take a 1-year mat leave if you want. It's okay. You're going to get through it. Right. So I think just letting go. I wish I'd, I'm saying this to you, but I think about myself, would I have actually done that? I don't know that I would have.
It's definitely a consistent theme, I think. I think we're going to roll up like what every single person says, but it's definitely a theme that we hear as we talk to different women. So, well, Glain, this has been great. We're so thankful that you were here. Lots of real tangible advice and tools that people can use. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
One of the things that she touched on that I thought was really impactful, and I'll just share a personal story on that, is about knowing yourself and then knowing the impact you want to have. And I did one of these 360s and kind of applied it to a framework. And one of the things that was a big blind spot for me, and I was a team person, I had my team involved, I was running, everything was good, except that the feedback I got was that I was just moving too fast. There was this concept of structuring, and she talked about it a little bit about herself as well. I'd never seen it in an assessment until then. I was like, oh, structuring. And so it made me really reflect on just assuming because I said it, they got it, wasn't enough. Like I had to really kind of structure my thoughts, structure how I brought them along, structured my meetings. It's never going to be a full strength of mine, but I needed to really blunt the lack of structure in the way I approached my team. And so this power of knowing yourself just is so critical to being able to develop yourself as a leader.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I really like this idea of knowing yourself, because I've done a bunch of tests in the past and I love them because I want to know more about my strengths and my opportunities. And interestingly, I did one very early on in my career. It was one of those 4 colors, and you figure out if you're more analytical or more, people or whatever. And the results that I got back at the time, this was a long time ago, but the results I got back were 25, 25, 25. And each quadrant was 25. And at first I was like, oh my God,
amazing.
This is amazing. I'm perfectly rounded. And then I talked to my HR lead at the time who encouraged me to do this test. And she was like, okay, yes, it's great that you have all of the elements, but you can have a tendency to just go round and round. And that was my kind of watch out that I had to walk through, because I can send myself and my team crazy.
Right.
Because I make a decision really quickly, but then I do want to ask them for their opinion. And then I do want to workshop through it and get all of their ideas. And then I do want to go research and make sure that I have all the information, and I need to stop myself. And so that's something that I've worked on over the years.
Right.
So I think this idea of knowing yourself is huge. I like that. I love that.
Yeah. Something I continue to take away from these conversations is being intentional, because you can end up in your 40s somewhere you had no idea that you were going to end up. And oftentimes it's great, but sometimes you don't know where to go for the rest of your career, because you're like, well, how did I get here? And so this notion of like taking bold moves and really being true to yourself in terms of like, am I getting what I need? Am I going to where I need to go?
I also think it takes the pressure off your 20s and 30s and 40s, quite honestly, if you're like, I'm just collecting information. I'm just trying to figure out if I like this or not. And I often think you learn more about what you like by knowing what you don't like.
Someone said to me recently, and a lot earlier on in my career, well, you don't need a 360 to hear from others how you're doing or where you can improve. If you're curious about that, you can find that out by just going and asking, right? And yes, it's not anonymous, and maybe it's not, fully structured, et cetera. There's something very powerful.
That's really scary. That's really scary. I don't know.
You don't even do it?
It sounds, I think you have to have a very specific group of people that it is safe to do that with, that you trust their feedback, but also trust them not to just say nice things. I think a lot of times, especially if you're a woman and your peers are men, I don't know that I would be very comfortable to just ask.
Totally. And that's a great point. Like you can't just go and ask randos.
No, because I'm so busy trying to impress them and make sure that they don't think I'm, incompetent. But
but I do think that there's an element of like, who is your peer group? It could be external people. It could be internal people. But who are the people at your level or around your sphere that can be truth tellers to you? I personally, and this may not be for everyone, it may not be for you at all, Gail, but like, the notion of having this group of people that you sit with every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and you listen to what's happening and you give feedback or you help people along. There's something there for me on that, but I recognize it's not for everyone.
You have that. I think it's great if you have.
I think the question is it lucky, or do you go find it and you find people that you can be that way? To me, there's something about, if you're someone who wants to develop, resting it all on your manager or your organization to figure out how you're going to do that. It's just, you got to find your way to get more than that. It has to be a thing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.